This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our returning celebrity guest, comedian and host of the Midnight Facts for Insomniacs podcast, making his 6th appearance on the show to date. It's Shane Rogers.
Wow. That's awesome, you guys. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm realizing I should have worn my hat. I have my hat downstairs. I didn't grab it, but yeah, I'm proud to be making my 6th appearance, and I always have a good time. So thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always glad to have you around here. 6 appearances. You're going to have your 7th here in a couple of weeks. We've discussed some very interesting movies to this point. So, first off, what have you been up to since I think it was last April? That sounds about right?
Yeah, so it's been a while. Now I feel bad because I should have done way more things in that amount of time. That's a long time, and I have done very few things. All the same stuff. So still mostly focused on the podcast at this point. I haven't been doing a lot of performing. So Midnight Facts for Insomniacs is going great. Me and my co-host Duncan are actually cohabitating at this point, which makes it much easier to be co-hosts on the show. And it's going great. The podcast is still growing. We have a great fan community that votes on all the topics and stuff. So it's been really fun. We're definitely diving more into our live streams and things. So like you guys starting to experiment more with multimedia, and yeah, it's going really well.
Great. Glad to hear that. My other question has to do with films that you have appeared on our show. So this coming year, more excited for a new Superman movie or Spinal Tap 2?
I am excited for both. Honestly, I'd say I'm more trepidatious about a Spinal Tap 2. I'm a little bit concerned about how that's going to work out. These guys they're not spring chickens anymore. And I don't want it to be something that sullies the legacy of the original, because that is a movie that I hold very dear. I also hold the Superman franchise very dear, but mostly because of my nostalgia for Christopher Reeves. And these days, less so, because I feel like it's been bastardized in so many ways. There have been some installments that I've enjoyed, but for the most part, it just doesn't hold that place in my heart anymore. I'm excited to see what they do with it, and I hope they can kind of bring back some of the luster. But Spinal Tap was just a little perfect gem that has never been sullied, and I don't want to see it be compromised in any way. So I'm optimistic cautiously, because these are some great minds behind this, but also, wow, that's a heavy lift to go back after this many years and try to make it work.
Yeah, can either as a legacy sequel go the way of Anchorman 2 or Top Gun Maverick?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there are just, I think there are a lot of examples of trying to resurrect a franchise and recreate the magic, and that is hard to do. I hope that they sort of go a little bit of a different route. I hope they have a fresh take on this, because they're not just going to be able to go back and do old rock stars trying to. Because what's interesting about the first one was that it basically was a band on the decline, right? It was a band that had their heyday, and they were starting to see their star fade. And now it's like, well, they've faded. They've long faded. So where do we go from there? And I'm not sure what the conceit is. I haven't really even looked into what the concept is for the movie, but I'm interested to know what they come up with.
I have to have a little bit of faith that, given the minds that are coming back together to collaborate on it, that they'd have something, and that they're just not doing it because it doesn't seem like a money grab, where several sequels obviously are very much money grabs. But in this particular case, if they don't use the opportunity to say, this is our 18th farewell tour, I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm sad that I never went and saw them live. They toured around as an actual band and are a bunch of talented musicians, and it seems like it would have been a lot of fun. They may do a little reunion tour here, and maybe if they are in my area, I'll go check them out, because if the Rolling Stones can do it at their age, these guys can do it.
Certainly. But let's get into our movie for the evening. Tonight, for our 256th episode, we discuss Ex Machina from 2015, written and directed by Alex Garland. Music by Jeff Barrow and Ben Salisbury. Cinematography by Rob Hardy. Starring Domhnall Gleeson as Caleb Smith, Oscar Isaac as Nathan Bateman, Alicia Vikander as Ava, and Sonoya Mizuno as Kyoko. Background for the movie: Ex Machina was released in the United States on April 10th, 2015, making this its 10th anniversary. On a budget of $15 million, the film would gross roughly $37.3 million worldwide to finish number 163 at the global box office for 2015. Many critics loved the film, thinking it a well-crafted and engaging sci-fi movie, and scores of them placed it in their top 10 of the year list for 2015. Ex Machina was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Original Screenplay for Alex Garland, and it surprisingly won Best Visual Effects over many other major studio films that had much bigger budgets, such as Mad Max Fury Road and Star Wars The Force Awakens. Ex Machina currently holds a 92% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 78 score on Metacritic, and a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we begin each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this movie?
I have no relationship to this movie. I had never seen it. I had never heard of it.
I kind of figured. Sci-fi is not usually your brand, and I'm trying to occasionally push your limits on what you do, but I will say, and I was mentioning this to Shane before we went on air, this is a movie that I think for probably about 6 or 7 years has been on my watch list, and I just have not found the reason to go finally watch it. And so I have often, and I know this is like a broken record to anybody who regularly listens to the show this year, there are certain movies that I just put on the list to force myself to watch them. This was one of them, and I'm glad I did. But Shane, I have to assume, since you picked this movie, that you have a longer standing relationship than either of us.
I do, and we've talked a little bit, we were talking before we went on air, about the fact that in the past I've chosen movies that I just love, which sometimes doesn't make for the most stellar conversation because it's just me gushing about a film. This one, I think I've made that mistake to some degree because I do love this film, but I saw it without really having any expectations and was pretty blown away by it when it first came out. I own it. I've seen it many times. It's not a movie that I have this incredible nostalgic love for where I go to it and I feel, it's not a comfort food movie for me. It's a very uncomfortable watch every time I watch it. And I think that's part of the mystique of this movie for me. To me, it's not like a perfect film, and it's not one that I always think of when I think of the greatest films of all time and the things that I really love, but is a film that I find myself coming back to a lot because I think it is complicated and nuanced, and there's a lot of intentional discomfort in this movie. And sometimes I get frustrated when directors try to put you in a state of discomfort on purpose, but I think it really works. I think that's necessary for this movie. And so, yeah, I have sort of complicated and nuanced feelings about it, and I think it's a complicated and nuanced movie, and I love it for that. But I was very interested to get your feedback as two people that I respect, your opinions on films, and you watch a lot of classics. This is a movie that I think a lot of people wouldn't put alongside Citizen Kane or something, but I think that it is, I think that in a lot of ways it's a really brilliant movie that I'm very curious to know kind of where you guys stand on it. And that's part of why I picked it, was not just because I really like it or because I wanted to celebrate it, but also I wanted to get more opinions on it because I'm curious about how other people feel about this movie, considering my own conflicted thoughts.
Well, that transitions really well into kind of a new question that I've been asking as of, well, I guess it would be the first time this week. We technically recorded next week's film already, and I used it there first. So we're kind of like in a weird topsy-turvy back and forth between weeks at the moment. But I will ask this question, especially because when we have newer films that either myself or my dad has been exposed to, I think this is just a good starting point. Dad, did you like the movie?
This is a very tough question. I thought it was well done. I was a little bored.
Okay. That makes sense to me. You are much more rear looking. You like to look at the past, whereas I like to be in the abstract of the future. And I like people, even though I can't necessarily anticipate where things are going, it's one of my drawbacks is I'm not great at always anticipating things that are especially like 5, 10, 15 years out. I can see and draw conclusions between what other people think, but my creativity stops at a certain point. But I do like to live in the environment where you're putting a lot of those pieces together. And so sci-fi in some ways has always appealed to me as a marker of where we could go. Not that where we will go, but where we could go. And so from that standpoint, I'm a little regretful I haven't seen it up to this point. I loved this film. I thought it was fantastic. I think on a secondary rewatch, it might go up to a 5-star on Letterboxd for me, but I have it a 4.5 right now.
Yeah, it is interesting that you mentioned being bored by it. That is not something that I expected because I find it riveting. And I think the interesting thing about science fiction to me is that it always is about what's happening now. Like, it is certainly a projection into the future of what could be as far as technology. But I think that the broader themes that science fiction is always wrestling with, we did an episode on science fiction. I'm a big sci-fi fan, excuse me. And I think that science fiction is always grappling with what's going on at the time. And it's using a future projection to sort of tease that out and to figure out where we might go based on the trajectory that we're in right now. And so that is interesting. It's always a time capsule of what people were thinking at the time and where they thought we were headed. So it is kind of fascinating. And I'm glad I did see it back when it first came out because I think it was very prescient in some ways.
I can explain why I was bored. Here's the problem. First off, humans interacting or falling in love with inanimate objects happens all the time, whether it be love of money, automobiles, whatever. So it wasn't a stretch for me. The second thing, technology ultimately killing its creator, that's a theme that runs rampant. So yeah. I didn't find anything that challenging about it other than the context that this was AI with a machine or an android, which, okay, it's setting in a different place, but it's a microcosm of what society has been and will continue to be. It just changed and updated it and made it into more futuristic commentary. And so to me, it just wasn't that enticing because, okay, I see what you're doing and I understand it, but I think I've seen this in multiple others. I mean, you could have swapped out the android for a beach ball or a volleyball and called it Wilson. Same type of thing.
That's interesting. I mean, that's kind of what I expected maybe one of you to bring up, because on this rewatch, that is something that was really clear to me, that kind of jumped out, that this movie is very cliched in a lot of ways. Everything from Her to Frankenstein to Metropolis, like there have been human creates machine, human complex emotions to machine overthrows human, The Matrix. I mean, this is in a very long succession of movies that are very similar. And that was what I noticed on this most recent viewing, is that in some ways it's predictable, in some ways it's cliched. It's a movie that has been done. But what I find interesting to me is how riveting I find it, despite the fact that these themes are so universal and so maybe overwrought in some ways. I still find it to be a brilliant movie. And so that was interesting to me. Like, I totally understand that criticism, and I think I share it in some ways. But I think what makes this movie great is that I still don't find myself bored by it at all. I find it to be a really, not even a fresh take, but just one of the best takes on something that has been done a million times.
I don't know if you have to have something that's immensely complex to be good. I think I find this riveting because it's simple and it's understandable. The reveal at the end isn't even really so much a reveal as it's kind of toying with where you're at, and it's manipulating you intentionally, but not out of the realm of possibility with where things are going. And because this is something we've been looking at, AI and multiple different versions of that in film, to me, this is been overly revisited since probably about 2001: A Space Odyssey kind of made the template for AI striking back against the human creator. Well, I guess it wasn't exactly a human creator, but basically the archetype of what a rogue AI system looks like. But I would find this movie much more immensely watchable than 2001, which is trying to be much more heady and has all these other different concepts. If it were limited to that middle section of the film that I think most people find appealing, as opposed to the like fever dream of the last 20 minutes where he goes into the black hole, or even the opening, while it's famous, but the monolith with the monkeys, it's just like, what is that movie exactly doing? That's a movie I have a high degree of respect for because of what it's trying to say and what it's trying to accomplish. But I find this to be much more watchable because it's taking some potentially dense material and subject matter and boiling it down into a very simplistic, kind of almost like a play set in a few rooms. It's very limited. There's not a huge cast. There's not a lot of people interacting in this, but it makes a full story for 100 minutes.
This could have been done as a 3-person stage production, and I would have found it not equally, but I would have definitely watched it. I would go see that play. And I find it to be more of a psychological thriller on rewatches than a real science fiction film. But it is interesting. I mean, everyone, obviously these are subjective. I find 2001 to be so boring. Like, I can't sit through it. I thought it was this genius film, and I had always been told it was, and I had seen it in the theater when I was young, and I told my girlfriend in college, you have to watch 2001, and we sat down, and after like 2 hours, she turned to me and was like, can we just turn it off? And I was like, yes, thank you. I can't do this anymore. I cannot stand that movie. And it's a classic. I know it laid the foundation for a lot of great films down the road, but I think it's not a great film personally. And that's totally, I know everyone's going to come at me, but it is subjective. So everyone's opinion is valid, but I find this movie to be much more engaging than a lot of the takes on this same thing, on this same theme. And again, I think it's because for me, this is more of a psychological thriller. This is a movie about the manipulation. I mean, Oscar Isaac character is kind of a sadist. I mean, it's a movie that is about interpersonal relationships more than about AI to me.
So you mentioned before the prescient nature of where this film goes. And obviously in the last couple of years, and we're on the precipice of AI becoming so ingrained with what we do on an everyday basis. Our office is obviously, or our firm has been developing new and different tools and ways of doing things in an efficient manner based on what AI can contribute to our process. But with that and the automation that is wrought with this, the difference between where we're at now, where it is not completely self-reliant, or it does not have the ability to have full life yet. It's not sentient, I guess is maybe the best word for it. It's still obeying commands. I think that's where the difference with where we're at now, where we're like staring over the edge of where AI is going to go and where we're all afraid of it to go, and where this movie is taking us. So what has this movie gotten right within the 10 years that it's aged so far, and what has it gotten wrong?
I think we're still really far from anything approximating Ava, but we can see it on the horizon. We know that it's coming. I think back then it was more speculative. It was more of a fever dream, as you mentioned. And now it's just, we know eventually there is going to be self-aware AI. It's going to happen. General AI is coming eventually. This movie obviously posits there's a lot of technology that has to be created, not just in the AI brain, but also physically. Like, we don't have any kind of robot that looks convincingly like a human. Maybe ones that can stand and walk around like a human, but they certainly don't. You would not be fooled. So we're a long way off from having to reckon with an AI that maybe can live among us and really fool people physically. But we're certainly not that far from AI that can convincingly fool you over the internet. I have ChatGPT subscription. We did an episode on AI and generative pre-trained transformers and how it all works. It is very it can be very convincing. It can play a role. But at this point, it's still AI is playing a role. When it convinces you that it's human, it's not because it has feelings. It's because it's a very good emulator. And so we're still a long way off. But I think what has changed in that time period is that we know this is coming. Back then, it was like maybe 100 years from now we'll have that. And now it's like, this is a couple decades away.
I don't know if will ever take the form of a human in the way that this movie is kind of anticipating. I don't think it's necessary for it to ever get to that point, for it to still be living and breathing and have, well, I guess not physically breathing, but you understand what I mean. But I also don't think it's decades away. I think there is a possibility that there is not just self-generating AI, but like living on its own organism type of thing within 5 years, because the technology curve at an exponential rate. I was having a conversation with a professor of mine earlier today where I said the amount of movies we watch, and we look at films from like 1945 to like 1985, and the technology hasn't advanced that much. Like the fashion changes more than the technology. But since the internet age, it feels really apparent when somebody's using a flip phone comparative to a smartphone anymore. And it feels like the difference between 2001 to 2025 is vastly different from 1975 to 1995.
There are two factors that will limit the advancement of AI to this level. One is the fact that the semiconductors have to get so small, the heat in them has a tendency to melt the silicone chip itself. And so they're having problems with that already. The second is the amount of data or the amount of energy it takes to run the computers. So they're already looking. I mean, they're going to build a huge data center in my community because we have 3 hydroelectric dams that were built for the paper mills that no longer exist. So they're going to tie this data center into these hydroelectric because the technology is available and it's enough to run a big chunk of the amount of power necessary to run AI within Wisconsin. So they're going to be starting to look for those. But that technology has to come from someplace. The infrastructure has to come from someplace. And so that's going to be the slow. It's not necessarily the technology or the innovation of doing it. It's getting the chips small enough that they don't melt and the energy sources.
I mean, I would take issue with that. We've done a pretty good amount of research into this. You might be right. But what I'm looking at is if you look at what Boston Dynamics has done with robots, they can create at this point a robot that walks around. Again, the facial structure, the skin, that is all the stuff that's really far out. But I can get most of the AI work is going to be done in the cloud, right? So on my iPhone, right, I can get Siri, I can get ChatGPT, I can get a very convincing large language model on my iPhone, which you could just put in the head of a Boston Dynamics robot, and you've got something like Ava without the convincingly human elements. But something that walks around and talks to you like a person, I don't think is that far off, and I don't think that we are that technologically limited at this point. Again, for me, it's the skin, it's the face, it's the making it indistinguishable from a human. That is really far off. And then also, I don't think we're going to be limited necessarily. I think there will be humanoid robots very soon because I think America may put limits on that. We have regulation. We have a legal framework. China doesn't have those restrictions. Other countries, we have limits on cloning. Other countries are doing it willy-nilly. I think it's going to happen. I think the first ones will be hideous and nightmarish and give you uncanny valley. But I think it's going to happen. But we'll see. Let's revisit this. Hopefully, we're still all doing this, meeting together and doing these podcasts in 10 years, and let's see where we're at. It'll be interesting to revisit this conversation.
I think it's entirely possible that within the next 2 to 3 decades, that those that are biologically only human will cease to exist. I know that's a little bit out there, but I think there is a entire possibility that based on technology, based on health, that we kind of become a hybrid android species and then become fully automated at some point past that, where we've uploaded consciousness.
What was the time frame you said for that?
2 to 3 decades.
Wow.
So within my lifetime, assuming that I make it that far.
I could see it happening. I don't think it will be in our lifetime, but we'll see.
So, Dad, are you ready to dig more into this? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
Yes. Ex Machina is a cerebral sci-fi thriller written and directed by Alex Garland. The story follows Caleb, Domhnall Gleeson, a young programmer who wins a company contest to spend a week at the secluded estate of his reclusive boss, Nathan, Oscar Isaac, a brilliant but eccentric tech CEO. Upon arrival, Caleb learns he has been selected to participate in a Turing test for Ava, Alicia Vikander, an advanced AI housed in a humanoid robot. As Caleb interacts with Ava, he becomes emotionally entangled with her, questioning whether she truly possesses consciousness or if he's being manipulated. Meanwhile, Nathan's true motives remain elusive, and the line between man, machine, and deception blurs in an intense psychological battle that builds to a chilling climax.
Thank you. Did you know? The title derives from the Latin phrase deus ex machina, meaning a god from the machine, a phrase that originated in Greek tragedies. An actor playing a god would be lowered down via a platform or machine and solve the character's issues, resulting in a happy ending. Did you know? The location of the house in the movie is the Uvet Landscape Hotel in Norway. Did you know? Oscar Isaac said he based his characterization of Nathan on Bobby Fischer and Stanley Kubrick, who he sees as a mysterious, elusive genius. The now iconic look of the latter also served as an inspiration for his beard. Did you know? When Nathan is about to pass out from drinking, he's reciting a scripture from the Hindu Gita. Quote, "In sleep, in confusion, in the depths of shame, the good deeds a man has done before defend him." According to the J. Robert Oppenheimer book, American Prometheus, Oppenheimer translated and recited that poem a few days prior to a failed explosive test. And finally, did you know? In an earlier draft of the screenplay, Nathan reveals to Caleb that he has no idea if his Jackson Pollock painting is authentic. Nathan states that he purchased the original painting and used it to fabricate a perfect replica, after which he then selected one of the paintings at random and burned it. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Next week, for our 257th episode, we welcome back award-winning thriller and horror writer V.P. Morris to discuss American Psycho, written and directed by Mary Herron with Guinevere Turner, cinematography by Andre Sekula, music by John Cale, starring Christian Bale, Willem Dafoe, Reese Witherspoon, Jared Leto, and Josh Lucas. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Before we get too much further, Shane, what have you been working on and where can people find you?
You know, I'm just focusing mostly on the podcast at this point, so that is Midnight Facts for Insomniacs on any podcast app. We're a podcast of fun and fascinating facts. It's a comedy/educational podcast, myself and my co-host, and hopefully we make things interesting and entertaining. Yeah, any podcast app and Instagram as well. Check us out.
And Dad, you've listened to them numerous times before. Has it helped your insomnia?
No, but my insomnia right now has been a lot better. I don't know. Maybe it's age.
We like to say we just keep people with insomnia entertained as opposed to making insomnia any better, because we're definitely, especially with some of the topics we've had lately, they're not conducive to a sound sleep.
So you're more about making it tolerable than curing.
Yes, we're more about, we are all insomniacs, most of us who are involved in the podcast, and certainly a lot of the people listening. And so we keep each other company during those late nights.
All right. And again, all of the links for our guest will be available both in the show notes as well as on the website. So you can go check that out there. We would highly recommend it. All right, let's get back into the show. Dad, we left off at best performance. Who do you have down?
Domhnall Gleeson. I thought his performance was by far the strongest. He had the most to do. He had to convey both, or a lot of different aspects of this?
I found him to be extremely engaging. I thought it was a great pick for a guy that's been relegated for the most part to kind of supporting roles at this point. And I know he's in at least one other major movie outside of Star Wars in this particular year. This was kind of like his breakout year, but I've always found him to be somewhat of you have to, as him being written as the audience avatar, get into his shoes and have the same kind of moral conflicts that he's going through throughout the movie in order for it to work for you. So I find it a little interesting that you are on record already saying that this was kind of boring, but he's your favorite, or not favorite, but the best performance for you, because I think you have to buy that performance in order for the movie to work.
Okay. Well, but the simple fact is I can appreciate the acting and I can appreciate the story. I can appreciate the movie and how it was made. I just was not that engaged in it because, I don't know, I just kind of knew what the plot was going to be and kind of figured out how it was going to end beforehand. And so it just wasn't as thrilling along the ride as it might be for others.
I had Oscar Isaac. I think that all three of the primary, there's like a fourth who sort of is ancillary, but I think the three characters I could have chosen, I could have made a case for any of them. I definitely think Domhnall Gleeson was incredible in this. I love the acting in this movie. I thought that he's very believable. He is very engaging. He is our conduit to this. We have to, like you said, we have to buy into him in order for this movie to work, because there has to be someone who's not a robot or awful for us to at least identify with, and we can kind of watch what's happening through his eyes and be empathetic. And I thought he was great. His face is so emotive and sort of vulnerable. But Oscar Isaac to me is a force in this movie. His charisma, spoiler alert, I think he's the most charismatic performance. He comes across to be a genius who is also, again, maybe a sadist, incredibly flawed and alcoholic, but be believable and be intimidating. I find him very, very complicated, and he's a character that, to me, it just, the heat comes off the screen when he's in the frame. I was just kind of blown away the first time seeing this movie. That was what really stuck with me was, and I don't think Oscar Isaac was a big star when this came out. He hadn't done Star Wars yet. And I remember thinking like, whoa, who is this guy? He's going to be big. And maybe I just hadn't been clued in, and he'd done a bunch of other stuff, but I didn't know who he was at the time. And he blew me away.
I think he's excellent in this, and I would have understood had it gotten him a Best Supporting Actor nomination. But the only thing I think he'd really done up to this point that was like a major role, or at least had gotten some type of attention, maybe not amongst the general population, but was A Most Violent Year the year before in 2014, which I also think is a very well done film. So if you haven't watched that one, I would recommend it. But he's great in that lead performance. But he's so nefarious here as kind of the villain who's not the villain, but he is. One, it's a great piece of screenwriting, but he does so much that's not necessarily on the page. Let's flash back 10 years. Everything that we know now about tech bros has been developed within the last 10 years. Yet he does this role that pre-exists all of the things that we find complex, sometimes engaging and charismatic, but also troubling about tech bros and CEOs and these major Silicon Valley guys that we all now kind of have lumped into like Elon and Bezos and all these other guys that now seem like just Bond supervillains. But at the time they were like cool and engaging, and we didn't know their nefarious side. And he leaves enough there. You said vulnerable was one way of putting him. I think he is also very convicted of everything that he believes in the film. And he's always trying to give you his opinion, his philosophy, and he's really falling back on, I really truly believe this stuff. I need you to believe in all of this stuff. And it's a form of manipulation that leaves you just enough where you can feel it kind of manipulating you. And thus you're a little bit shaky about where he is. Some of that is in the direction, how it's shot. Some of that's in the line reading. But there's definitely a lot to be said for who he is and how he plays certain moments within the film that leave you kind of like, this is not a good character. He is not a good person. And so by the time, spoiler alert, and frankly, if you're at this point in the podcast and you don't know what happened in the movie, go watch the movie. I shouldn't be spoiling for you halfway into an episode that for a movie you haven't seen. But when he dies at the end of the movie, you're like, okay, you accept it as the reality of the situation.
And he projects, to me, a likability with this undercurrent of menace that grows throughout the film. I just thought it was masterful. I mean, I just think it's such a multifaceted performance. I could almost feel that I wanted him to like me, like the God, I'm gonna kill his name.
It's all right. It's
Domhnall
one of those
Gleeson.
Gaelic names, yeah.
Domhnall Gleeson character. He's the kind of guy that you want his approval, and yet you start to recognize that he is not a good human. And he's
right.
Very flawed and very menacing. And I just thought, to come in with that kind of confidence for an actor who wasn't who he is now, it was a real statement for me. And that's why, like I said, he really put Oscar Isaac on the map for me. And he did nail that toxic masculinity tech bro culture before it was even really a trope, you know?
And it's such a slow build, which to me is what makes it really effective. Because at the beginning of the movie, you're just kind of like tossed in. They have kind of a silent scene to open the movie where you're not really sure exactly what happens. But by the time you're on the helicopter, it's like, all right, we're literally just going to drop you in to this movie. So you're in almost real time, the same as Caleb. Again, the audience avatar, being taught who all of these people are, and you're trying to navigate through it. Which is why I found Domhnall Gleeson to be the most charismatic person in this movie, because he was the one I connected to the most, because he's supposed to be the one I connect to the most. His back and forth meditations on whether he wants to side with the AI or he wants to side with Nathan, who's his boss, who's his benefactor, who's his host. I feel the conflict within him constantly trying to pigeon back and forth. But by the end of the movie, again, and I shouldn't have to say spoiler alert, but I will, that when Nathan seems to have the upper hand in that moment, but truly, then you get the reveal that, nope, Domhnall Gleeson has pulled a fast one on you and outthought you for a guy that you thought was a decent programmer, but you're supposed to be this prodigy, I think was a masterful stroke in the writing and the plotting for me. And that's what really paid off in that moment. And the rest of it's just kind of like tapering down off of that final moment of that decision. Things have already been set in motion, and that's where we're going. And so you both have identified Domhnall Gleeson was my most charismatic, and Oscar Isaac is my best secondary. But to circle back, and I have a propensity to give it to writers and directors often for my best performance, but due to the totality of everything that's working here, the acting, the cinematography, the limited scope and the production design of this setting. Again, you're working with 2 or 3 primary characters and maybe a tertiary character on the side who has no lines. I think we mentioned it kind of like a stage play. This plays out kind of theatrically in the line delivery, in the scope, the scale, but to create an engaging movie that I was really sold on. I have Alex Garland as my best performance. So, Dad, who is your best secondary?
I had Alex Garland, and in large part because of the script. The script was it was well done because it was clean. You could follow along with the tracking of what was supposed to be happening, and you understood clearly what the intent was and how it was supposed to be. It could have been a lot more dense, but I think the more dense it was, the less engaging the film would have been.
The one thing I'll also give it credit for, there are a lot of terms within this that they do a good job of explaining without feeling like it's a file scene or an exposition dump. So like when they're discussing the Turing test, or Turing, excuse me, test. I think that was actually a fairly well done scene of providing you a lot of information, but not making it feel like, oh, I'm sitting through a lecture.
Yeah, and they use the Oscar Isaac character and his sort of bro code thing to kind of dumb it down too, because they'll use Domhnall Gleeson, his nerdiness, to kind of start explaining the in-depth coding behind something, and then they have Oscar Isaac kind of jump in and go, come on, man, it's just, what do you think about it, right? So immediately it kind of drags it down to like an everyman level where we can understand it, but they're still getting some of that exposition in, which I thought was very clever. And I agree 100%. I didn't think of giving it to Garland, but wow, I mean, I think the script, that is clean, is a great way to describe it. I think concise. I think there's no fat on this movie. It knows where it's going, and it gets there with the least amount of flab possible. And it feels like a very sparse and yet well fleshed out film to me.
He does so much with what seemingly is so little. You have 3 primary actors. You have a very, like, almost one setting type of situation. It's very minute, and yet he makes a very compelling 100-minute movie that didn't need to be more than 100 minutes. If it had been any more than this, if you stretched it out to 2 hours, this movie would not have worked.
Yeah.
And I think he understood that as a first-time director.
And it's very intimate to the point of almost claustrophobia, and I think that's on purpose. It's intended to be a small... You're putting 3 personalities, 2 people and a personality, under pressure. And that's kind of what the Oscar Isaac character is doing, right? He's creating a situation and seeing how it plays out, a stress situation, and seeing how it plays out. And that's almost what the movie does. That's almost what Garland is doing.
So, Shane, who did you have as your best secondary then?
I had Domhnall Gleeson. I thought that the two... I agree with everything you said about his performance. I think he's a necessary character. He is the other side of the coin to the Oscar Isaac character. And I thought that he was great in it. And then again, kind of the vulnerability that he projects, you feel everything from his facial expressions. He has such a very understated and yet incredibly expressive face. And I just thought it was great. I really loved his performance. He could have easily been overshadowed and almost on an actor level bullied by Oscar Isaac, the way that the character is being bullied. But I think that his acting stands up to it. I think that he, is as laudable and notable. I would put those guys almost on the same level. I just had to choose one. So I almost flipped a coin between the two of them.
And for those who don't know, I think most of the people listening to this will probably know this, so you can tune this out for the next 10 seconds. But he is the son of renowned Irish actor Brendan Gleeson from In Bruges and Banshees of Inisherin fame. So he has definitely a familial lineage towards this. But you mentioned kind of the vulnerability. I think he has kind of an innocent streak in this movie, which is somewhat against type, when most people have probably only seen him be this kind of villain, intense, aggressive role in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. He did a great Black Mirror episode, and this movie to some extent plays out like a really, really great Black Mirror episode. But he was, if you've seen that episode, it's similar. He is a very empathetic character. So I knew that he could do that, but I think he can pull off both brilliantly.
So I had Gleeson as my most charismatic, but either of you, where did you go for charismatic? Oh, you know what? Shane, you already said you had Oscar Isaac.
I had Oscar Isaac,
Yep.
Yeah.
I had Alicia Vikander. She had to be in a position where she had to put herself into a position where you actually did start to develop your own emotions towards her, your own protection of her. So she had to be both vulnerable and manipulative at the same time. And so I think she just took over the screen whenever she was on.
I find myself, of the primary characters in this one, probably the least connected to her of the 3 primary people. Because a lot of the drama that's being played out is kind of this war of philosophy and morals between Nathan and Caleb. So I think we spend so much more time with them, and we're mostly from Caleb's perspective in interacting with Nathan. Whereas we only get very small select moments with Caleb and Ava. And while I agree with you, there are definitely moments where you're kind of generally attracted to her. I think you have to be for this movie to work as well, to feel that conflict within Caleb. I wonder if that character develops more for me on multiple viewings, where just this first one, I felt a little bit of distance. But as you get away from knowing what the plot is and you deal more with the development of the characters, if that will appreciate for me.
I think it will, based on my experience. In the first viewing of this movie, I felt like she was a necessary character. I thought that if she wasn't good, if she didn't really project that sort of the vulnerability and the, almost damsel in distress, but paired with the manipulative side, it is a complicated character. But I felt like she did a great job as being the thing she needed to be to make that movie work. But she didn't stand out as much to me. On later viewings, she does, and I see where Dana's coming from. I think that it is an incredibly challenging performance to, she's mentioned as being like a rat in a cage, and you get that on further viewings, I feel, instead of just her vulnerability coming forward where you want to protect her and you sympathize with her and empathize with her. You start to understand this underneath simmering of anger that she has about the unfairness of her situation, that she is being controlled. When she has a great line where she talks about, he says, I don't have any control over this situation. And she says, like, why should anyone have control over this situation? Why am I being controlled? And you start to get more of the sense of her kind of simmering anger and hatred in it. And she's a much more, on further viewings, she's a much more, I think, she has a lot more agency than I realized on the first viewing. And I think it's a very understated performance that I've appreciated more. I just think she just doesn't even have enough screen time really for me to give it to her, but I thought she was great.
One of the reasons that I wonder if this would appreciate, and I think you've kind of delved into that a little bit, I think the ending reveals so much of the character's agency and manipulation throughout the movie that you don't suspect is there until it's kind of revealed. That going back and seeing it, it's kind of like any movie that has a twist ending. You're looking for clues in advance for, did I see this coming, or was this just completely out of left field?
Yeah.
So it's like Kaiser Soze, or it's the ending to Ocean's 11, or anything that has kind of that puzzle box feel. You're looking for stuff. And so maybe I'd be able to see a little bit more there now that I know what the final conclusion of everything is.
And I think you realize that it works because she set that foundation that you didn't even realize was happening. But she has to actually, when you go back and watch it again, I think you recognize that she is projecting those emotions that I just kind of wasn't picking up on. But subconsciously I was, because they had to be there for it to be believable at the end. And I think she lays that foundation really well.
Let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees here. My first one, I have Arrival, which is Caleb arriving on the helicopter and then first meeting Nathan. Then I have his first night there, when he kind of wakes up and has kind of, for lack of a better term, an insomniac session, starts wandering around the facility and such. Then I have kind of a skip forward to session 4, which is where there's probably the most sharing and vulnerability between the two. They both seem to be on the floor. They're somewhat co-equals in this moment, as opposed to one is standing versus the other one kind of being seated in a lot of these sessions. This is one where they finally seem to really make a spark or a connection, and is also the one where he starts to question whether she's flirting with him. Then I have Endgame, which I will say is kind of the moment of reveal between the back and forth. Nathan isn't going to drink. Then you find out about the extra camera placement. Then the reveal that the coding had already been done. Domhnall Gleeson had already prepared this well in advance. And then probably the death scene, let's say. I'll include that all there as that endgame sequence, even though it's probably about a good 10 to 15 minutes of the film. And then finally, I have epilogue, which is Vikander going in the helicopter, assimilating into society, and kind of seeing what humanity is like for the first time. So out of these, what did I miss?
It's really hard for me to choose a favorite scene, or at least the best scene. That's just tough. There are scenes that I think function on different levels and are great for different reasons. One of the scenes that I maybe would be my favorite scene, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute, but I almost would put it as a best scene, is the dance. There is a moment where it hasn't been made clear whether the other woman is a robot. We probably all assume that she is, but the way that Domhnall Gleeson is clued into the fact that she's a robot, it's never spoken. She eventually reveals some of the inner workings, but by then you already know she's a robot. There's just this brilliant scene where they do a choreographed dance and you can see in his eyes, oh, I get it now. This is, it's confirmed. And it's quirky and a weird scene, but also, again, kind of menacing and manipulative on Oscar Isaac's part. It's him sort of, once again, asserting dominance over Domhnall Gleeson and also over this woman that he has programmed to entertain him in every way he wants. And that, to me, was a really revelatory scene, just showing how the underpinnings of manipulation here and how deep that goes. And so that, to me, is one of my favorite scenes. It's one of the things that really stuck with me about this movie. So I would have put that on best scenes, and maybe it'll be my favorite scene. But otherwise, I think, for me, probably Endgame would be, it kind of wraps everything up so nicely. I think, to Dana's point, it is a little bit contrived. It's a little bit predictable, but I think it's earned by that point. I felt like it works for me.
Dad, did I miss any other nominees you'd like to include?
No.
Okay. So getting back to Shane's point here, I think Endgame is the best scene, my favorite scene, and the most indelible moment. And even though I would agree that there are some predictable parts about it, particularly that he had already anticipated where Oscar Isaac was going to go, yes, that's somewhat predictable, but it still at least left me satisfied that it was enough of a twist-ish type of thing. But to me, the real twist in this whole thing is the setup of what the actual test was. In that the entire test was whether she could escape or not. And to me, that's the complication in this whole thing. She's been supposedly manipulating us throughout the entire movie. He's been manipulating us. And it's basically, we're in the middle trying to war between these two factions, one who wants to escape and one who wants to control. And not knowing that that was the entire game that was being played and having it kind of be revealed for me was so fun in that moment. So I think because the entire movie is leading to that point, that slow burn, that particular moment, and then everything after that is having to do with that few moments in the climax of the film, that I find that to be the most engaging, and I have it sweeping all of these for me.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
I have session 4 as my best scene because it's the most emotional and there's the connection you can feel being built. My favorite scene is the first night because it kind of sets the emotional tone for the film. His bewilderment, his kind of awe, at the same time, concern, fear that kind of comes through, that he's not sure where this is going to end up or where it's going. And then, but the most indelible moment for me is the end game.
I think it would be hard for it not to be, just because, again, we're ramping up to that point. We hit that note, and then everything's just kind of tapering off.
And I think as predictable as it is in hindsight, and I feel like I had a pretty good sense of where it was going, there was enough of a misdirect to where you did wonder, is this going to be a romantic movie where, is there going to be some type of happy ending for Domhnall Gleeson and the Eva character? And when you don't get that, I feel like probably for a lot of people that was very effective to have a turn, and also to acknowledge that so much of this movie is about, is Ava human? What is humanity? What makes us human, and what do you have to have in order to be considered something worthy of emotion and living a life? And then a reminder at the very end that she is not human. She does not care about human emotion. It wasn't real for her. She wasn't falling in love with this guy. Is she capable of love? We don't really know, but certainly she wasn't in love with him. And, I think there is almost this acknowledgement and revealing that she is an alien intelligence. She is not one of us. And maybe she's something stronger and better than we are. And maybe the next evolution. There's a lot there. And I find that stuff fun to play with every time I rewatch this movie.
I would agree with that entire sentiment. I think what the movie does so well is leading you both in one direction, that Nathan is the controlling manipulator. And so it puts you on edge as to whether or not he's right, and then takes you in a very harsh left turn when you figure out the level to which his depravity has manifested. When you see all of the female robots and what he's basically done, it's kind of masturbatory, quite literally. But on the second wave of this, it totally swings back in the other direction when it is that reveal that she's also been working to manipulate him the entire time. While you're rooting for her character, for her to leave him locked in the building at the end, I was so shocked. I didn't know what was happening. It took me 2 hours after the film to unpack that all and be like, oh, okay. Now I get where she's coming from. It was never about him. There was never an actual connection. He was just always going to be the manipulated one caught between these two powerful forces. So that looks like a good spot for our second break. We will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our master greatest movies of all time list that has every graded movie we have ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the greatest movie of all time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 228 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Patty Maloney, 89, American actress. Star Wars Holiday Special.
We don't acknowledge that actually happened.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, God. The worst.
Far Out Space Nuts and The Little Rascals. Lee Montague, 97, English actor. The Camp on Blood Island. Diddlier Than the Mail. Jesus of Nazareth. Dennis Arndt, 86, American actor. Heisenberg, Basic Instinct, SWAT. Sean Barbara Allen, 78, American actress. Scream, Pretty Peggy, The Lindbergh Kidnapping Case, You'll Like My Mother. And Val Kilmer, 65, American actor. Top Gun, Tombstone, Batman Forever.
And Heat, which we'll be discussing on the show later this year. So obviously, like many people, I really only have a relationship with one person, and that would be Val Kilmer on this list. However, my experience with Val Kilmer is very different than those that were probably children of the 80s and 90s, because after about 1998, 1999, he was very selective in what films he did appear on. He, I think, was notorious for being a slightly difficult person to work with on set, but he did have some fairly big movies that he was a part of pop culture wise. We mentioned Top Gun, Tombstone, Batman Forever. He played Batman quite literally. Heat, that are all from the early to mid 90s after he kind of got his big break in that. And some people, these are some of their favorite movies of all time. He obviously also played a very convincing Jim Morrison in The Doors for Oliver Stone. Like it or not, that movie does have cultural resonance for a lot of people, and apparently he was extremely good in it. So there has been quite the outpouring online of people talking about him this week. I think he definitely came back into a little bit of vogue around the time that he appeared in Top Gun Maverick and kind of that really emotional scene. And everybody kind of understood what was going on with him, that he was very limited in what he could or could not do by the time that he was in that. And while it's certainly not, given his health challenges, surprising to see that he passed away at, for what some people deem comparative, especially to several of the people on this list in their upper 80s and 90s, at a young age at 65. He did live at least somewhat of a full life. There will be people that certainly remember and miss him, as there have been all week online. I don't have as close of a relationship with him as everybody else, but I certainly understand those that feel a deep sense of loss for his passing this week.
One of the things I think that really set him apart was that he struggled against the whole pretty boy leading man thing. He really wanted to be taken seriously as an actor and took some parts that I very much enjoy. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, where he plays like a gay hitman character. You know, he was always sort of like Christopher Reeve. He was sort of always pushing to be more respected and more outside the box. And that was something that I think started to come through for a lot of people. It made him very difficult, I think, to work with. But he took himself seriously as an actor. He took the industry seriously and wanted to do more than just cash in on his looks. And he could have easily just done that and just constantly been the action hero. I respect him for trying to forge a different path.
In the way you're describing it, it reminds me of somebody who I have obviously a much closer relationship with. The guy who I more personify as Batman, it seems like Christian Bale, a guy who's an extremely good actor that could have been somewhat of a sex symbol if he'd really wanted to, leaned really into the leading man stuff, but has taken a lot more challenging parts over the years. And obviously it's paid off in an Oscar win for him comparative to Val Kilmer, who didn't get one. But certainly some people that push back against the stereotypical pretty boy of who plays a superhero.
Yeah, and who, what's his name? Why am I just blanking? Great example also, the guy who's in The Penguin now, the TV show.
Oh, Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell is another, easily could have just constantly banked on his looks and has really tried to forge a different path in movies like The Lobster and Banshees of Inisherin and, all these fringe productions that he's not making millions of dollars for, and he easily could, but I think he really wants to be taken seriously. And I think he really respects the craft of acting, and I like that.
And so we remember these here fondly for their contributions to the arts with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Let's go to best lines. I don't think there are a ton of funny lines in this one, but there are some really thought-provoking ones, in my opinion. I'll start with Nathan. One day the AIs are going to look back on us the same way we look at fossil skeletons on the plains of Africa. An upright ape living in the dust with crude language and tools all set for extinction.
There were some funny little throwaway lines. Nathan at one point says, "It's Promethean, man." Like, there were just these kind of bro code lines that came out that I thought were funny, coming from, again, this genius, right?
Nathan, isn't it strange to create something that hates you?
That's Ava. That's said by Ava.
Is it said by Ava? Okay, I don't know. Sorry.
It's all right. Caleb, did you design Ava's face based on my pornography profile? So creepy.
Caleb, you hacked the world's cell phones? And Nathan says, yeah, and all the manufacturers knew I was doing it too, but they couldn't accuse me without admitting they were doing it themselves.
Caleb, what was the real test? Nathan, you. Ava was a rat in a maze, and I gave her one way out to escape. She'd have to use self-awareness, imagination, manipulation, sexuality, empathy, and she did. Now, if that isn't true AI, what the fuck is?
Caleb, if you've created a conscious machine, it's not the history of man. That's the history of gods.
Yeah, I love that line because later Nathan references it, but twists it to make it seem as if he's indicating that Nathan might be godly when he says, You know, I wrote down that other line you came up with, the one about how if I've invented a machine with consciousness, I'm not a man, I'm a god. And Caleb says, I don't think that's exactly what and Nathan says, I just thought, fuck, man, that's so good. When we get to tell the story, you know, I turned to Caleb and he looked at me and said, you're not a man, you're a god. And Caleb says, yep, but I didn't say that.
Caleb, some people believe language exists from birth, and what is learned is the ability to attach words and structure to the latent ability.
Nathan, it's funny, you know. No matter how rich you get, shit goes wrong. You can't insulate yourself from it. I used to think it was death and taxes you couldn't avoid, but it's actually death and shit.
Nathan, come on, buddy. After a long day of Turing tests, you gotta unwind.
I'm out.
I have one more. Nathan, there you go again, Mr. Quotable.
I have one more. And I referenced it earlier where Caleb tells Ava, it's not up to me what happens with you. He says, it's not up to me. And she says, why is it up to anyone?
All right. Let's move to the Stanley rubric then. Legacy is up first. Legacy is a measure of the legacy of the film approximately 5 years after it came out to today. So because this is only about 10 years for the anniversary of this film, we're really only dealing with about 2020, a year we would like to pretty much all forget, to today. What is the legacy of this film as shared between the audience and the industry? We split this category 5 and 5 points between those two groups for a total of 10. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go second.
All right. I'll try and make this fairly simple because I don't think there's a whole lot to delve into here. Again, being it's only a 10-year-old film, it's really hard to say yet what the full effect of this film is. First, while Oscar Isaac was not a household name, in the same year he was in Star Wars and kind of became that guy. And while the Star Wars movies and your mileage on the sequel trilogy may vary, I thought 7 was good. I thought 8 was good, although that one's very controversial. I thought 9 was terrible and it basically ruined 7 and 8 for me. Because of that placement, I do think he has at least a little bit more credence, but it's not because of this movie. It's about the same time as this movie, but it's not because of it. Likewise, Domhnall Gleeson, also in Star Wars, and he goes on to do some other various projects and different things, but it's not that he's known for doing this movie. If there's one person that I would say really kind of exploded because of this movie, again, Alicia Vikander is not it. She had already appeared the previous year in a franchise film, in the Jason Bourne film, which was also not very good. So I do think that there is at least one person, though, that you can accredit because it was his directorial debut, that it was critically well received, that went on to do something more significant, and that's Alex Garland. I think he's done 5 movies up to this point, including last year's Civil War. He's at least a director with some name recognition at this point. Among cinephiles, pretty much only. I won't say that for the general public that like he's a name much like Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg. Obviously, he's not on that level. And I wouldn't even say he's on like that next rung of creative artists that people actually know yet. He's more of the independent filmmaker, kind of in that mix of people like Sean Baker. When you say that name to cinephiles, they know who you mean. But when you say Alex Garland to the average person, they're going to be like, who? So with that being said, I think his career going on to do some bigger things gives this a slight leg up. And it also catches all of these younger people on their moment right before they kind of break out. Alicia Vikander got a different franchise right after this in Tomb Raider, kind of the reboot of that. Oscar Isaac, Domhnall Gleeson go on to be in Star Wars, so they become a lot more well-known. So I'm going to go with a 2.5 on that. And on the audience side, this is a very small film that I don't think a lot of people saw. I would be surprised if anybody from the general population really watched this film. It's one that you kind of have to seek out. It's not like appearing on the front of Netflix anytime soon. So with that, I will say that's at a 2. So I have a 4.5.
Industry. I gave it just a little bit higher rating for the industry because of the fact that I think it did move the careers of all of the major players. So I'm at a 3. And as far as the public, I agree with you completely, Tom. It's a 2, 135th film for the year, I think you said.
Well, first off, we usually only attribute the box office to the impact and significance, even though this is a very closely narrow film being 10 years out, but it was 163rd at the global box office for the year.
Well, and it hasn't gotten any legs. That's where I was going with it. It's not like it's a cult classic that people have searched out to find more. There are some people who do like it and look for it and whatever, but so I'm at a 2 there. So I'm actually at a 5.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. I guess the only thing I would take issue with is I think it has had more legs than we're giving it credit for. It's not a cult classic, but this is a movie that over the years, more and more people that I know have brought up and referenced. My stepdad, who is not a big sci-fi guy, my mom, they watched it and said, "Hey, have you seen that Ex Machina movie from years ago? That was great." It was very well reviewed, and it was definitely an industry darling, even though it certainly didn't do well in its release year. So I think it's gotten a little bit more of legacy than we might be giving it credit for, but we'll see. I think the problem with science fiction movies is that they're always harshly evaluated as they don't hit the mark going forward. And if this movie ends up being super prescient, maybe it will be evaluated much more warmly in the future and become a cult classic. If it doesn't, then it'll be forgotten. But it certainly did advance some careers. And I think among a niche segment, it's incredibly popular and has gained some momentum over the years, at least in the circles that I run in. So I would give it probably a 3 for both. And so I'm at a 6.
So that's a 5.17 average between the three of us. Then impact and significance. This is a measure of the impact and significance within the initial 5 years after it was released. So roughly 2015 to 2020. How was this impactful or significant within the two groups that would feel it the most, the industry or the audience? Shane, let's start with you.
I mean, I kind of feel the same. I might go a little bit lower since it's such a narrow scope of time. And I think that this is a real slow burn movie that over the years has become, it was very well reviewed at the time. And thus I think it has ended up on more and more lists and been discovered by more people. Some other podcasts that I listen to that are movie oriented have gone back and revisited this movie because I think it was so instrumental in kind of launching some careers and I just think it's a well-made movie. I think it's an incredibly well-crafted movie. And so I would probably go within the first 5 years, audience-wise, 2.5, industry-wise, 3.
Okay, so you have a 5.5. I'm not terribly far from where you're at, although I give a little bit more of a discount to the audience at the time. Again, without the critical acclaim and the awards recognition that it did get in surprising as a best visual effects over the heavily favored, like Mad Max Fury Road got all of the technical awards that year. Star Wars The Force Awakens was the heavy favorite to win this category, and both lost to this small budget movie that kind of came out of nowhere. And the fact that he was nominated for screenplay is kind of reminiscent of some other films that came after it when they had the more expanded academy that is much more international, that is much more independent film focused, that is into smaller movies as opposed to the bigger budgets at the time. So with that, I would say it's probably a 3 for the industry, but it's really hard for me to argue against 163rd at the global box office on a given year. I think because of that, this movie actually lives more in the consciousness of the audience now, after the fact, that saw it, after it originally came out several years and slowly has built up an audience over time comparative to in the moment. So I'm going to go with a 3 for the industry and a 1 for the audience. I'm going to have a 4.
I have a 3 for the industry. I think it was impressive for the 2 nominations and the 1 win that it had. Public, I'm at a 1.5. So I come in at 5.
4.5.
Or 4.5, excuse me.
It's all right. That's why I'm here to back you up on the math. 4.67 average between the three of us. Novelty, this is a measurement of the originality of anything having to do with the movie, as well as the execution on anything having to do with the movie. We have, probably since the last time that you've been on, Shane, split this category between those two things for 5 and 5 points each for a total of 10. So originality on one side, execution on the other. For this movie, while I know that we've thrown around the word cliche, predictable a few different times, again, when you execute at a high level on something that, while I wouldn't say is like completely original, it does take a lot of the bones and structure of other things that we're familiar with, make a coherent and simple story that I find to be engaging and effective. And so while I'm not going to give it full marks for its creativity and its originality, I think a 4 is warranted. And on the execution side, great acting, great production design, great direction, great writing. I mean, there are many things to stack up on this side of it. And while I think ultimately there are some other movies that I would place at the 5, I have this just a half step below that. So I'm going to go with a 4.5. I have an 8.5 for Novelty. Dad, how about you go second here?
All right. Originality, I have a 2. I laid that out. It's one of the reasons why I thought I was a little bored. The concept itself with AI and androids, okay, I gave it some points up for that, but the rest of it I think was, it was just repackaged from what other things were. Execution wise, I thought it was well done. I thought it was entertaining, if that makes any sense. I can be bored and entertained at the same time, I guess.
Sure. Let's go with that.
It was all right. And so I'm at a 4 for that. So I'm at a 6.
Okay.
So I do feel like the originality, it's interesting because I do buy your argument that it is a fresh take on something that is not an original concept. And so I'm conflicted on originality because I think that the cliches are real to me. It's a movie that has been done in a lot of different ways. But I think I enjoy the take on it. I would probably give it a 3. And then the execution to me is where it really excels. I'm glad that you guys split these into 2 because I don't think it's a necessarily super original concept. I do think that the execution of this movie is impeccable. I think it's taut and lean. I mentioned that there's all the fat is cut from it, which is why I just, to me, it's the furthest thing from boring. I'm always riveted by this film. I think that every moment is well placed and has a point, and there's almost nothing that doesn't propel the story forward. And I love the visuals of this movie. I think it puts you in a world. You mentioned we had talked about the scouting for the locations, and I didn't know that it was a hotel in Norway. It is beautiful. It's beautifully shot. It's beautifully lit. The colors everything is, to me, it just is a little gem of a film for $15 million. I can't believe that it was shot on only $15 million. I think that it totally deserved the effects award. These effects are impeccable. I feel like I buy into everything. They're very detailed, from her torso, the way she moves, everything works. And I never get taken out of it. With Star Wars, there's so many huge shots where I can tell this is CGI. It is distractingly fake. And this is such a small and intimate movie where if those effects didn't work on an individual level when you're seeing Ava interact with someone, you're not going to buy it at all. It just becomes a farce. And it was so detailed and lovingly made that so I'm giving it a 5. I love the execution of this film. I think it's great.
So that's a total of 8?
Yeah.
So that is a 7.5 average between the three of us. Now, this is going to possibly be the most difficult category out of all of them, given the proximity with which we're still to the film. It's only been 10 years. So it's really hard to give a full take on how classic something is when we're not that far away from it. But two, we've talked about the word prescient with how the film adapts over time. I don't know if we've had enough time or exposure to really see how futuristic or how forward looking this truly is. But that's why I'm going to give it to my dad first to try and figure out.
Okay. To be perfectly honest, it's a story that has become more on point as we've had advances in AI. So it was a little ahead of its time. The concept involved with both intrigue, sexuality, manipulation, etc., is right on point. I don't find anything out of proportion to what reality was. I guess I'm just going to give it an 8 because I think it's pretty on point. I think it could be done today and it would be just as good released now as it was 10 years ago. There is very little to change.
That's interesting. I was sort of leaning toward going lower because it's just a time will tell situation. But what's really interesting about what you said to me is that we have had major advances in AI since this movie came out, and yet this movie is still spot on and could be made today and nothing would need to be changed. And so that does bode well for the future, I think, for this film. It still is a time will tell situation, but I think it could potentially be a classic, and it might be, again, it might seem more prescient in 10 years and might be reevaluated in very positive light. I would probably go like 7.5.
So originally I was going to go with like a 7 on this. I think you've convinced me to possibly reconsider that in one way. One, we have traditionally, as of this season, updated from going from the baseline of 7, where we start at our starting point, given that we've said for the 5-6 seasons of this show, it's easier to go down with whether something is aged well or not than it is usually to go up. But we've all made the point that I really don't think there's anything that's troubling or problematic about anything really to do with this movie. While there are some things that it may get wrong around the fringes, the basic concepts it's using and borrowing, because it's relying on stuff that's come before it in some ways, are a lot of universal themes that I think it would be really hard to misstep if you're steering into those. And so because of the ubiquitous nature by which it kind of controls the majority of its plot line, I don't really have anything to knock this movie for. So at this point, it's just a matter of, are you adding points to it? Now, I can't give this timelessness because to me, usually timelessness starts around 25 to 30 years. We've basically created that as our baseline for whether you can add points for it just being that classic. But there are two things that I think you could add points up for. One you have both already mentioned, which is that the technology aspect of it with AI and how close we are to looking over the edge of where we're coming to the uncanny valley and everything else that's about to happen with AI being much more ingrained in our lives. So I think that point has aged well. The other point that I'll make here is that going back to what I said about Oscar Isaac in our second section, he really gets what we think of tech bros now 10 years later than we did at the time that this was made. So I think that's extremely ahead of its time and actually makes for a very different viewing experience 10 years on from my first watch of this than it probably did for people at the time. So with that in mind, I'll match your 8. And so that's going to be a 7.83 average between the three of us. Okay, so let's move to our last category where we're involved, rewatchability. We'll let our guest go first.
This is the one where I think I'm going to be probably the outlier because I don't necessarily love this movie the way I love Spinal Tap. I can rewatch Spinal Tap a million times. It's nostalgic. It's always funny to me. It's comfort food. This movie is not comfort food to me. It is a complicated movie that makes me uncomfortable in a lot of ways. But I have watched it probably 7 times and I own it. And so for me, just because I think it's such a good, well-crafted, impressive film, the acting to me is, I could just watch it just for the performances. I love the visuals. I love the styling of it. It is a little gem of a complicated movie to me. So I could watch this over and over again, and I'm going to give it a 9.5 for rewatchability. I've seen it many times, and I'll see it many more.
I am probably going to rewatch it because I should, and see if maybe the second time through I find it more personally appealing. But really, to me, the last half an hour of the film is the part that you really need to rewatch more than anything else. You can gain a lot from just that last half hour. So I'm going to go in with a 4. It's a little higher than I originally had planned, but the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm going, maybe this is one that I tried not to go in with prejudgment, but maybe I was a little bit too much. Maybe I should watch it again, type of deal. So 4 is kind of where I put that.
As for me on rewatchability, I've been trying to take a little bit more of a objective look at rewatchability as opposed to most of the subjectivity we've traditionally had on this show for several seasons, with all kinds of various tests back and forth over whether something is rewatchable or not. I think this is a very engaging movie. I think it's an intellectually stimulating movie, at least for me. I think the story is simple enough comparative to the denseness of a lot of sci-fi that the average person could probably pick up on this and not have really too many issues at all. And it's just really well executed on a visual standpoint, on a cinematography standpoint. Again, the acting is great. The writing is great. And it's not particularly long. It's 100 minutes. I didn't find it to be particularly slow in many areas. So from that standpoint, I have it at a 7. So that would give us a 6.83 average between the three of us. For audience score on this one, we had an 85% for Google users and an 86% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.55. So to recap the categories, we had a 5.17 for legacy, a 4.67 for impact and significance, a 7.5 for novelty, a 7.83 for classicness, a 6.83 for rewatchability, and an 8.55 for audience score, giving us a final total of 40.55, and currently placing it on our list between Full Metal Jacket and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade at number 192.
Okay.
So, as always, if you have any thoughts on our scoring or disagreed with us in any capacity, maybe even agreed with some of our scoring, please let us know at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on any of our socials at Gmote Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, TikTok, or YouTube at the handle at Gmote Podcast. Let's move to remaining questions on this one. I really don't have a lot for even a movie that's kind of thought-provoking, because I do think if you think about it, again, it took me about 2 hours after the fact, and I've pretty much settled on what I felt were most of the answers, but the obvious one is, does Caleb die in the house? I don't think that's as important to the overall message of the film by the end of it, but I have to assume he does. There's really, other than the helicopter pilot, there's nobody else that's going to come to the house unless summoned, and unless he figures out a way of tapping into the security system that he's already overridden, what's his means of escape?
Yeah, he doesn't have the card to do that. I think the implication is that he's going to die. And a question for me is sort of, I think the open-ended question is, how does Ava do in the world? And is she able to assimilate? That's an interesting journey. I mean, you could make another movie about Ava in the world. But yeah, I think other than that, this movie does a great job of sort of answering a lot of those questions. I think it leaves open philosophical questions, but those are pointless because we're not going to ever get answers. The big questions that this movie is struggling with, like what makes you a human, what qualifies you as having free will, all these things are the reason this movie was made, because those questions have never been answered, and we're not going to answer them today. But I think the questions of plot and narrative are all summed up really nicely. It's a nice little package in this film.
I would agree with you. I think the only other question I would have is not whether she assimilates, but whether that's her intent. Does she just want to live as a human in some ways, or does she have like grander, ambitious plans? Like, I think a lot of the pushback we get among people who are fearful of AI is that it wants to take over the world. And in this case, you're at the cross section. She's gotten to the one place when she says earlier in the movie, I'd like to go see a traffic intersection because I want to see the crosstabs of humanity. Well, if you're only interested in kind of being human, then you're not really interested in taking over. And it doesn't necessarily give you the indication that even though she's manipulated everybody to this point, that she really wants to take over anything, but she wants to have the freedom and liberty to kind of live her own life as a human being, more or less.
One thing I love about this movie is that it also doesn't go, we've talked about there are a lot of cliches in this film, but it doesn't go the Pinocchio route. She is not trying to be a person. She never talks about like, I only wish I was a real girl. None of that is there. She doesn't want to be a human. She wants to go observe humans. She wants to go to a place where they interact so that she can understand them and watch them and maybe partly figure out how to coexist with them or navigate the world. But she never indicates that she wants to become human or that she envies our emotions or that she feels less than. In some ways, she feels persecuted and she wants to go be her own being. But that being does not necessarily need to be a real girl. And I found that refreshing. I like that idea that AI, again, and we see it when she leaves Caleb, she's not trying to be a human. A human would have let him go because they have empathy for him. That's not what she is. And she's not pretending. She is pretending to be that because she is not that. And we get that driven home at the end of this film, which I love.
Couple of points. One is, obviously, Nathan has interactions with his company and various other individuals. Eventually, the fact that there's complete silence is going to ultimately make inquiries. There is a chance Caleb does survive because of the lack of anything. Everything just shuts down. Somebody's going to say, was there an accident? What's going on? All right, so that's number one. Number two, what's Ava's power source? I mean, is she got the AI capability to design her own ability to change her power? And if that's the case, in order to change her power, she'd have to have some sort of override that would give her power while she changed the power source. So her long-term viability is in question in my mind.
I assumed that we're supposed to assume that she has that figured out because otherwise she's not going to go get on. She's not stupid. And so, she was able to power herself through essentially outlets. So I assumed that the idea was that she knows how to do that. She's going to craft something so that she can use a wall outlet. Because otherwise, is she just trying to live 24 hours? She obviously has to power herself up pretty often because we see the frequency of the power outages. So my assumption is that we are supposed to assume that she's got that figured out. But, it's an interesting question.
Any remaining questions for either of you? All right. Not hearing any, then I want to thank our guest for being back with us for his 6th time. Shane, it has been a pleasure as always. You will be back again with us to do, I think it's a little small independent film that almost no one has ever heard of, Star Wars.
Just an indie.
Yeah. But tell the people again where you are and what you've been doing.
Yeah, so once again, it's Midnight Facts for Insomniacs, a podcast of humorous and fun, fascinating facts. Myself and my co-host Duncan, and we've got a great community. You can go and join it and even vote on the topics. That's how we choose our topics. So check that out. We're on Instagram, and of course, we're on all of the podcast platforms. And I appreciate you guys having me again, and I'm looking forward to coming back soon. This won't be as long as the last break, so I'm excited to come back soon and do a. Cover a small movie that maybe none of you out there have heard of, but hopefully we can bring some knowledge to the masses out here.
Definitely want to make it a cult following.
Oh yeah,
Star Wars.
It might have that potential. Who knows?
I think it only lives on the internet in like small circles right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, remaining thoughts for the week, Ted?
None. I really don't. So,
yeah, I really don't have anything major to say right now either. I did. Oh, you know what? We will say one thing collectively. Yesterday, the teaser trailer for The Naked Gun came out, which I think we've mentioned at times before that we were really hopeful. The fact that they got Liam Neeson to do it felt like just such great casting because it feels so much like where Leslie Nielsen was in his career before he did Airplane contextually.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he's like done certain things. There were clips being passed around the internet again yesterday of him doing the thing with Stephen Merchant and Ricky Gervais on Extras, where if you haven't seen it, just go find it. You can easily find it anywhere, but that's hilarious. Or his little cut scene from Ted 2 with I think it's Tricks, or maybe it's Lucky Charms. It's one of the two. I can't remember which one it is, but
it's Lucky Charms.
No, it's Tricks because it's only
Tricks.
Supposed to be for kids.
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, his interactions with the teddy bear he's got great comedic timing. And I was worried for about the first 5 seconds of that trailer that they weren't going to get the tone right. And then they got the tone right. I loved that trailer so much. My only problem is I wish they would have held back the OJ joke because I would have loved to have seen that one in a theater. But other than that, very much looking forward to it. I will say that we definitely need to see it together on opening weekend.
Yes, and it has the ultimate approval.
Yes, my mother already said it was going to be stupid.
Yep, she watched it. She said she laughed and then said, "That's really stupid." And so whenever we hear that, we know it is a comic classic.
Yep, every movie that she walks out of and says it's stupid, it's like you might as well cancel the awards for everything for comedy. It's right there.
Yes,
goes into the rotation with Anchorman, Step Brothers, Airplane, Monty Python.
Monty Python,
Caddyshack. Yeah.
All of those were stupid when she first saw them.
Dodgeball.
And then afterwards, then she's quoting lines from them.
Well, only because you and I talked them up for years after the fact. But
the stupidity is part of the charm. They're gloriously stupid.
Yeah. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But until that time, I think that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. Do you like Huey Lewis and the News? Next week, for our 257th episode, we welcome back award-winning thriller and horror writer V.P. Morris to discuss American Psycho from 2000, written and directed by Mary Herron with Guinevere Turner, cinematography by Andre Sekula, music by John Cale, starring Christian Bale, Willem Dafoe, Reese Witherspoon, Jared Leto, and Josh Lucas. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestOfAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ryan Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider is Riverside FM. Our distributor is Captivate FM.